Hi, this is David Brennan with the Sword of David, and this week's podcast is on the rapture. Can the rapture happen today or during 2025? Is that even possible based on what the prophets say? Because a lot of people don't go to the prophets on this topic, and you know, I take the prophets very literally. So I'm going to present to you literally what they say concerning the rapture of the church. Now we're going to first take a look at 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16 and 17. Paul very clearly states that the dead rise first, and then, and only then, we who are alive are caught up to meet them in the air. It happens at the same time, but the sequence is you must have the resurrection first. He specifies that. He says, even before that, he says that those who are alive will not proceed, will not be, the church, that part of the church won't go to God before the dead rise. So he says it twice. It's very clear you cannot have the rapture, therefore, before the resurrection of the church. Okay? So let's just hang on to that kernel of truth. That's what Paul says. I'm sure you agree. We need to just believe what he tells us, and he's very clear about that. So now we're going to fast forward to the book of Revelation, chapter 20. In chapter 20 of the book of Revelation, John is telling us about how those who refuse to worship the beast will be slaughtered. They'll have their heads cut off. Ooh, that's pretty rough. And that's going to happen one day. Of course, it has already. We see things like that happening in the world today where Christians are being brutalized. But these are specific saints who have their heads cut off for a very specific reason. They refuse to worship the beast. Now, why is that? It's because at the midpoint of the 7-year tribulation, the beast sits in the rebuilt Jewish temple and declares himself to be a god. Thereafter, throughout the second half of the 7-year tribulation, he requires people to worship him as a god. And if you don't do it, you get your neck cut off. You get your head cut off, okay? That's what Scripture tells us in Revelation 20. We know that that's what's coming. But how it relates to the rapture is this. We are told that this is the first resurrection, that these particular saints, these particular martyrs who refuse to worship the beast, and mind you, they can only exist during the second half of the 7-year tribulation, because remember, the beast has to sit in the temple at the midpoint. Anyone who doesn't worship him thereafter in the second half of the 7 years gets their head cut off. These saints only exist in the second half of the 7-year tribulation. And John tells us clearly they are included in what? The first resurrection. The first resurrection. John is telling us there's no resurrection of the dead prior to this one. Now, some people say, oh, no, that's only for the Jews. Well, the problem with that is that he says it's the first. Now, remember this. How are we to take the book of Revelation? Are we to take it real loosely, or should we take it very literally? Well, that question is also answered at the back of it in chapter 22. We're told anyone who tries to add to the book will have added to them the plagues of the book. Anyone who tries to remove any words from the book will have their name removed from the book of life. Now, what's he saying there? Well, just what he said. He's making the point that don't mess with the literal reading of this book, because it's telling you flat out what you need to know. So those who claim, when John says in Revelation 20, this is the first resurrection, and he's telling you there's none before it, he means that. So don't buy into this, the Jews have a separate resurrection of the dead. There's nothing anywhere in Scripture to support there's a resurrection of the dead for Christians and a separate one for Jews who are saved. Because remember, they looked forward in the past. They looked forward to the coming of the Messiah. There's only one resurrection of the dead, and John says in Revelation 20, prior to the 1,000-year reign of Christ. There's only one, and he identifies it as happening in the second half of the 7-year tribulation because it includes martyrs unique to that time frame. In other words, you can't have the resurrection of the dead before the second half, because otherwise they couldn't be included in it to rise from the dead and receive their glorified body. So we're told by Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4 that the dead rise first, and then we who are alive are caught up in the rapture. We're told by John in Revelation 20 that the resurrection of the dead, and mind you, it's the first one, he tells us, the first resurrection of the dead doesn't happen until the second half of the 7-year tribulation. So you can't have the rapture before the second half of the 7-year tribulation. It is scripturally impossible. It runs in conflict not only with Paul and John, but other prophets as well. I'm going to do another one of these podcasts on Jesus when he leads us right up to the point, the season of the resurrection of the dead and the rapture. That's going to be another podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless you. And if you haven't accepted Jesus Christ yet, do so today. He's the only way. Take care.